Okay, so on our handout, we are looking at Chapter 25, Nation Building in the Americas. And one of the things that we're looking at today, we're going to be looking at actually Latin American independence. And if you look at that, Latin American independence, we're going to see how the map of South America goes from what it looks like on the left to what it's going to look like on the right. On the left, you have South America, and what two countries pretty much control most of South America on the left? Spanish and Portuguese, right? And they're still important, but there's something that we should see is that Spain and Portugal, even though they have vast colonial possessions, it says on your handout they are in decline. When I say they're in decline, it's just they're not as good as they used to be. You know, they're not as powerful as they used to be. They're not the power that they once were. It turns out that Spain and Portugal are in decline, especially when you compare who is actually powerful in the world at this time. Countries that are powerful in the world at this time include their rivals, France and Britain. We're going to write down they were on the rise in power. So those are the countries that are really economically and militarily powerful. Spain and Portugal kind of had their time in the sun, but all things rise and all things fall, and that's definitely Spain and Portugal. It says on the handout that the same economic and political factors that led to our independence movement also, it says on the handout, led to the movement in Latin America. So we're going to see those same themes that we saw in our own story be part of the independence movement in, you'll write down, Latin America. So let's go ahead and talk about the roots of the revolution on your handout. And it turns out that there's a group of people that are not happy with how things are. And what social class of people typically are the loudest, the most influential, the ones that can actually do something about their lack of satisfaction? What social class are we always going to refer to? It's always the middle class. And we're going to write down on our handout that middle class colonials were upset. And one of the reasons these middle class colonials were upset, there's some common reasons. For example, here's the whole issue of taxes again. But there's another reason that they're upset, and it says on your handout there's this issue of monopoly. You and I should both know, we should all know, a monopoly is where you can only really buy from one person or really only sell to one person. And that's actually not good for you and me because we don't have any choice in the matter. And when we think about economics and choice or limitations or rules or lack of opportunities, think about the guy who started capitalism. Who's that guy? 1776, he wrote a book called Wealth of Nations. He starts capitalism. Who's that guy?
John.
Nope.
Adam.
Mm-hmm. Adam Smith. He's the guy who starts capitalism. And listen, Adam Smith, he believes in something called laissez-faire, which means that what would be the appropriate role of government with business?
Leave them alone.
Leave them alone. Adam Smith, thought government should get out of the way, let business do them. Let business do business. It's better that way. Now, there's an economic philosophy, though, that is very different, and it's actually the antithesis of capitalism. And that's what we had at this time period, because at this time period, if you lived in Argentina or Mexico or Venezuela, the Spanish government thought you have one purpose. Your only purpose is to make your mother country money. You can only sell your stuff to them. You can only buy your stuff from them. And even if someone knocks on your door and says, I'll give you a better deal, if the Dutch say, I'll give you more money, if the British say, I'll give you a better situation, you can't say yes to them. You're not allowed to buy from anyone but Spain, not allowed to sell to anyone but Spain. What is that called? It's an economic philosophy we've talked about before. No, it starts with the letter M. Oh man, Hasia, you're correct. In parentheses, we're going to write that term mercantilism. That's spelled, if you don't know, M-E-R-C-A-N-T-I-L-I-S-M. ISM, mercantilism. That's the philosophy, economic philosophy that dominated at the time. And it basically said we can only buy Spanish stuff, we can only sell Spanish stuff. And really, that is something that limits business opportunities for the middle class. So they don't like that. There are also two recent events that provide the historical context for independence in Latin America. Whenever we frame the context, we're asking what has happened within 50 years? What's happened within 100 years of independence? If you look at the picture on the right, 1828 is our year. What has happened in the last 50 or 100 years that would inspire South America to declare independence? The American Revolution. What else? Well, yeah, the French. Now, Haitian Revolution did happen, but why would white middle-class people in Mexico not be looking to Haitians as an example? Yeah, they're black. Yeah, they're black, you know? Like, I'm all for, they would argue, the American Revolution. I'm all for, they would argue, the French Revolution. But I don't know if we're going to look at Haiti because they are people of color, they're black, and that could actually disrupt the whole social system where I'm at. So for outside influence, make sure you write down the American and the French Revolution. It says in the handout, there's also the role of our friend Napoleon. I don't know if you remember, but Napoleon had been the leader in France. He was a general. He kind of brought the French Revolution to a close. And Napoleon did a couple things. In fact, on this map on the screen, he actually directly took over everything in green, which means that he conquered the Netherlands and Belgium and parts of Italy. He full on took over directly. But the light green, or what? Yeah, light green. These are areas he took over indirectly, meaning that they are kind of like being bullied by him. They're technically free, but they're not really free. And then after the light green, there's the orange, which are friends of Napoleon. So really, Napoleon has pretty much conquered, directly or indirectly, most of Europe. And this is going to cause some chaos. In fact, it says on the handout, the role of Napoleon, he conquered Spain and Portugal, creating political chaos. It created political chaos. He had conquered Spain and Portugal. He created political chaos. Because you know what? If the king of Spain is arrested and the king of Spain's in jail, who's in charge of Mexico? Who's in charge of Argentina? If the king of Spain is in jail. In fact, if the Spanish government doesn't exist anymore, I might want to think that this is the perfect opportunity to declare independence. In fact, what country did declare independence because of the chaos of the French Revolution? We've already talked about it today. There's only one country that took advantage of the French Revolution's craziness, and they said, yeah, while it's crazy in France, we're just going to take this opportunity to declare independence. It's Haiti, right? Haiti was a French colony, but if France is literally beheading people and arresting people, and this person's in charge today, and then someone else, the Haitians took advantage of that chaos. So this is the same situation. The next line, it says the Peninsular War. And it turns out on your handout, it says that France controlled Portugal and Spain. They would come to control Portugal and Spain. And you should probably remember that Spain and Portugal, they're on a peninsula. A peninsula juts out and has water on at least 3 sides. And that's true. They're on the Iberian Peninsula. And so this fighting over Spain and Portugal, it's called the Peninsular War. And it says that there's a special type of war that this fighting was. It was a guerrilla war. And in English, there's 2 types of guerrillas we have in our English language. One is what? Like an animal, right? Is that spelled like that? No. So this is actually a Spanish word that has come into English. And as a Spanish word, the word, we mispronounce this as guerrilla, but how would you pronounce that if that was a Spanish word? Yeah, this comes from a root word guerra, which is like a war in Spanish. So this is like a guerrilla. And what a guerrilla war is in English, we'll write down on the handout, this was a guerrilla war. And next to guerrilla war, we're going to write down hit and run tactics. Hit and run tactics is what a guerrilla war is. What we mean by that is the Spanish kind of realized if we're going to fight France, I don't think we're not going to win. Like Napoleon's really good. And we saw clips of like how do they used to fight back at this time? They like line up one guy and then you line up your guys and you take turns shooting each other. Well, the Spanish thought, yeah, we're not gonna win doing it like that. It'd be better if we, ambush the French and then run away and we don't dress in bright red uniforms like the British. We have a guerrilla war. And basically this war is France versus everyone else, versus Spain, versus Portugal, versus Britain. And the Peninsular War, it says on the handout, was a war of liberation. They're trying to free the people of Spain and the people of Portugal. In fact, it wasn't a good situation for Spain because Spain has a king. And because Napoleon comes in and takes over, it says on the handout that Ferdinand VII of Spain, that was the king of Spain, that he was forced to abdicate. That word is Abdicate. And based on the context, if I tell you the French invaded Spain and then they forced the king of Spain to abdicate the throne, what does that mean, to abdicate? To step down. In fact, they actually throw the king of Spain in jail. And that's not a good situation, right? And what do they do to replace the king of Spain? Well, it says that Napoleon turns out has a brother, a guy named Joseph Bonaparte, and Joseph was placed on the Spanish throne. Now, most Spanish don't want to accept this. Like, why would you accept some French guy as your new king? Like, that's not okay. So most Spanish people are like, we're not going to listen to this guy. We're not going to follow this guy. And it says in the handout that Spanish patriots created a rival government. This is a government that they say, we're going to not accept this French guy. We're hoping the king can get out of jail. But until he does, we have a substitute. Until he does, we have a plan. And they create a rival government called the Junta Central. How do you spell that? If you look like 2 lines below, you'll see that the term junta, it starts with a J. It's the Spanish word, Junta. We're going to write that term, the Junta Central. And this is basically the substitute government that's going to rule Spain until the king can get back. And this was not a good war, not an easy struggle. I'm going to show you like one of the most famous paintings depicting Napoleonic influence in Spain. This is a painting by an artist named Goya called The 3rd of May. And in this painting, what character does your eye go to first?
One in white.
One in white. And if you ever take language arts, English classes, what does white typically symbolize? Peace, it can. What else?
Death.
White, I don't think really necessarily symbols death. Innocence is a real common example because, what were the Spanish people guilty of? Like, is that a crime to want your freedom? Here, the Spanish are innocent victims. In fact, if you look at the Spanish guy in white, what other historical character does he look like with the way his arms are positioned? Jesus. You might remember Jesus was crucified with his arms extended to the left and right, also an innocent victim of an imperial Roman Empire. Also, we have these characters. What kind of job does this guy probably have based on his haircut and his robes? Is that a soldier? Is that a rich man with a bowl haircut and black robes? Something with the church, it's a priest. So you have like priests, you have people on their knees, people covering their eyes. This is not what you think of when you think of a rebel army. But look at the French soldiers lining up to shoot and to kill them. What can you not see of the French soldiers? Their faces, they're these faceless killers. And if you look in the background, Spain is in literal darkness in the background now because of the Napoleonic invasion. And the artist is literally shining light on the oppression of this Napoleonic invasion. It says on your handout that this piece of art, the 3rd of May, the artist Goya tells us the story of hundreds of Spaniards that were shot by the French. And so on the handout, the Junta Central claimed the right to rule Spain and its colonies until the king was restored. The argument they made was, we're just a substitute. We are going to rule as long as the king's in jail, but as soon as the king is out, then we will back out. It says on the handout, most colonists supported the Junta Central. Most of them said, yeah, we totally get that. Like, we know that we aren't going to listen to Napoleon, but we also know that someone's got to be in charge. So most of them supported that, but a vocal minority objected. And there was a group in Latin America who said, no, I don't want to do that. And you can guess it's probably going to be the middle class. Because you know the group that's always kind of raising questions, or the one that's not always going along, it's the middle class. And it says that officially they claimed that they were loyal to the king alone. That was like their official reason. If you ask a middle class Mexican or middle class Argentinian, why don't you support the Junta Central? They're like, oh, well, you know, I'm just loyal to the king back in Spain, and I don't know who these guys are. But really, they're saying this because they actually just want to take over it themselves. You know, why would I allow power to go to a bunch of guys in Spain when I could just claim power for myself right here? And so it says that this was an opportunity for the middle class in the colonies to take power. And again, the middle class flexes their political muscles. As a result, it says on the handout, local juntas began to form. People in 1808, 1809, they start rising up in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Mexico. But these, yeah, go ahead.
What was loyal to the king?
They claimed they were loyal to the king alone, but really they were just looking for the opportunity for the middle class in the colonies to take power. We said that local juntas began to form. People rose up for independence in Venezuela, Bolivia, Mexico, but these movements quickly failed, and they were actually, these protest movements were put down violently, which actually had the opposite effect. Instead of like crushing the desire for independence, it actually inspired a greater sense of, you'll write down, nationalism. Greater sense of nationalism. Nationalism is a word we've used before. It's like pride in being Mexican, or pride in being Colombian or Argentinian, and that's actually what happened. And by 1810, more revolutions came to be and more focused. King John VI. It says on the handout that Napoleon had an impact on Portugal also, because the King of Portugal, you know what, the last thing he wants to do is get arrested and thrown in jail. So he actually fled to Brazil. Because you might remember Portugal owned Brazil. And he thought, you know what, if option one is I stay in Portugal and get thrown in jail by Napoleon, option two is I go to Brazil, hey, sign me up for Brazil. And the King of the King of Portugal runs away to Brazil for his safety. Spanish South America in 1811, Venezuela, a group of men that form a Creole junta declare independence. We've talked about this word Creole before. It has to do with race. You might remember a mulatto is what kind of person? What kind of mix? Black and white is a mulatto. A mestizo is a mix also of what types of people? Not Mexican and black. No. Mestizo is white and Native American. So I am mestizo because I have a white last name, Licon, and I have darker skin from my Native American heritage. Most Mexicans are mestizo. Most are mestizo. It's half white, half native. Miss Garcia over here is also mestiza as well. So most Mexicans are mestizo. But then there's this word Creole. Creole, you're a white person. And it's these white individuals who declare independence. It says on the handout that they claim to believe in things like popular sovereignty and representative democracy. This is an example of Enlightenment thinking. And here is the Enlightenment again. The Enlightenment inspires the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and now all of the South American, Latin American independence movement inspired by the Enlightenment. But there's a problem with this Enlightenment thinking because it says the leaders of this movement are actually landowners. And if you're a landowner, you make money farming. And if you make money farming sugar or cotton or tobacco, who's doing the work? Slaves. And so the irony here, the contradiction, is that the leaders of this independent movement that are like, oh, the Enlightenment's great, all people are equal, these are people who defended, you'll write down, slavery. And more than just defend slavery, they opposed citizenship for Black and mixed race people. And that should sound familiar because half of our founding fathers defended slavery. Half of our founding fathers did not want Black people to be citizens. So there's a contradiction here. So it says on the handout, free Blacks and slaves support the king. They don't support rebelling because why would you rebel? Why would you rebel if rebelling doesn't get you any independence? And so the revolution turns to this man on the screen. His name is on the board. His name is Simón Bolívar. They turn, and you'll write down his name, Simón Bolívar. It's on the board. To keep the revolution going, they place the revolution in his hands. This guy is super important, 10 out of 10. There's a country named after Simón Bolívar, Bolivia is named after him, right? And it says on the handout that he was in favor of slavery, but he eventually agreed to support emancipation to gain Black support. Emancipation is when you do away with slavery. So he's a practical guy, Simón Bolívar. He's going to be like the George Washington of Latin America. He's super duper famous. And he's going to actually say, I support freeing the slaves if it means Black people will support the revolution. His measures, though, he was even willing to kill people who did not support him. We're going to stop right there. I look forward to spending time with you guys tomorrow, or next time, rather.